This recording was not meant to be recovered. It does not begin at an airport. It does not begin in the sky. It begins with a disruption, a timestamp that should not exist, a landing request that arrives without origin, a clearance granted to an aircraft that has no present. Flight 914 did not return after 37 years. It returned inside them. According to official history, the plane departed New York in 1955. According to every ledger, it never arrived. No wreckage, no bodies, no final signal. History marked it as vanished and moved forward. But this is where the assumption fails, because time does not erase everything evenly. Some events do not dissolve into memory. They settle. They remain intact, suspended, waiting for access. What landed was not a flight completing its route. What landed was a moment refusing to end. When Flight 914 is reported to have touched the runway decades late, nothing about the moment behaves like a miracle. There was no relief, no celebration, only confusion that felt older than the people witnessing it. The passengers had not aged. The crew had not changed. Their watches still believed it was the same afternoon. The airport did not recognize the plane. The plane did not recognize the year. This is not a story about how an aircraft disappeared. This is a study of what happens when time fails to release what it captures, because disappearance is not always absence. Sometimes it is containment, and some containers eventually open. Some events do not disappear, they wait. Vanished, Flight 912, the landing that should not exist. The control tower received the call without warning. No build-up, no escalation, just a voice asking for permission to land. The frequency was clean, the tone was calm. The phrasing belonged to another era. Flight 914 identified itself as en route from New York to Miami. The date given by the pilot did not match the clocks in the tower. Not by hours, by decades. At first, the request was treated as a mistake, a miscommunication, a stuck signal replaying an old transmission. But the radar disagreed. A solid return appeared where nothing should have been. Speed consistent, altitude correct, trajectory perfect. An aircraft was approaching the runway with full physical presence, yet no historical permission to exist. When the tower asked for clarification, the pilot repeated the same information, same flight number, same departure time, same calm certainty. There was no panic in his voice, no confusion, only the subtle tension of someone unaware that the world had moved on without him. Clearance was granted not because it made sense, but because denying it felt impossible, as if the event itself was already underway and human choice no longer applied. The landing gear lowered smoothly. The wheels touched the runway without resistance. Rubber met asphalt as if the surface had been waiting. Observers later struggled to describe what they felt in that moment. Not shock, not fear, displacement. The sensation that the present had been interrupted by something unfinished. The aircraft taxied normally, engines powered down. The door opened, and what emerged did not look like survivors. It looked like continuity. Passengers stepped onto the tarmac dressed for the mid-1950s. Hair, clothing, posture, untouched by the decades they had crossed. Their faces carried no awareness of loss, only mild irritation at an unexpected delay. They asked why the terminal looked wrong, why the uniforms were unfamiliar, why the air itself felt heavier. No one had answers that could be spoken without breaking something, because the moment they landed, it became clear that the event was not behaving like forward time. It had remained where it was, until the world caught up around it. This is not evidence, it is behavior. The passengers were escorted into the terminal one by one, not because protocol demanded it, but because proximity felt dangerous, not physically, temporally. They walked with the unbroken confidence of people who believed they were still on schedule. No hesitation, no trauma, no sense of return. To them, the flight had lasted exactly as long as it was supposed to. They asked for coffee. They complained about the delay. They glanced at watches that insisted the same minute had never ended. When officials tried to explain the year, the words failed before they reached meaning. 1955 still occupied their bodies. Their reactions lagged behind the sentence. A woman laughed, assuming it was a joke. A man corrected the calendar on the wall, convinced it was misprinted. Another passenger asked why the terminal smelled unfamiliar, like materials that had not yet been invented in his time. None of them felt relief, because relief requires closure, and their experience had never closed. Medical examinations revealed no anomalies, heart rates normal, reflexes intact, cells consistent with their reported ages. Time had not touched them, but something else had. They spoke of the flight with subtle inconsistencies, not fear, not turbulence, but stretches of silence they could not account for, moments when the engines sounded distant, intervals where the windows reflected nothing but darkness, even though it was daytime, a sense that the aircraft had continued moving, but without direction. One passenger described the sensation as waiting without impatience. Another compared it to being held inside a breath that refused to release. They did not describe disappearance. They described suspension. When asked how long those moments lasted, their answers contradicted one another. Seconds, minutes, an entire afternoon folded into a pause. Time inside the aircraft had not advanced uniformly, it had pooled. And when the doors finally opened decades later, that pooled moment spilled out intact. This is where the narrative fractures. Because if the passengers never experienced absence, then where were they? Not ahead, not behind. They were inside the interval history skipped, a place not measured by years, but by unresolved continuation. And intervals like that do not dissolve on their own. They wait. If the passengers never experienced absence, then where were they? No one on Flight 914 remembers the moment it disappeared, because disappearance implies a boundary, and there was no boundary. The aircraft did not enter darkness, it entered continuation. Passengers described the flight as ordinary until it wasn't. No alarm, no turbulence, just a subtle loosening of sequence. The engines continued their rhythm, but the sound no longer matched the sensation of movement. Windows showed sky without depth, blue without distance, a horizon that refused to approach or recede. Time did not stop inside the cabin, it lost direction. Clocks continued to tick, but seconds stopped adding up to minutes. A stewardess completed the same walk down the aisle twice without realizing it. A man finished a sentence and felt the urge to say it again, as if the thought had not settled. This was not repetition, it was containment. What matters here is not proof. What matters is how the moment behaves. An interval formed around the aircraft, sealing it away from before and after. Inside that interval, duration behaved like pressure instead of flow. One passenger recalled looking out the window and seeing the wing reflected where the sky should have been. Another remembers the cabin lights dimming without changing brightness. Several felt the sensation of waiting without expectation, not boredom, not fear. Suspension. The flight attendants continued their routines, but could not recall when they began or ended. Meals were served without hunger. Conversation drifted without conclusion. Nothing decayed. Nothing progressed. The aircraft did not appear to move through time. Time seemed to move around it. This is why no one aged. Aging requires accumulation, and nothing inside the interval accumulated. Every moment remained present. Layered, pressed together. When the landing finally occurred, the interval did not collapse. It loosened. The runway did not pull the plane forward. It intersected it. Flight 912 did not return because the interval ended. It returned because the world crossed its position. And when that intersection happened, the contents of the interval spilled back into sequence, intact, unresolved, and dangerously out of place. Because intervals do not erase themselves, they attach. The aircraft did not endure time, it excluded it. It did not move through sequence, it sealed a portion of it. The aircraft did not return because the interval ended. It returned because the world crossed it. Flight 913 touched the runway, but the event did not. Landing suggests completion, a return to order, a closing of trajectory. This was not that. What arrived was only the portion of the interval that could be absorbed. The rest remained unassigned, still waiting for sequence to resolve it. The airport resumed operation, flights departed, passengers moved on, but the structure did not reset. Those who were present described a subtle compression afterward, moments that felt slightly out of alignment, seconds that hesitated before releasing. Not everywhere, only near the point of contact. What remained was not damage. It was a weak point, a place where interruption had proven possible. History records Flight 913 as an anomaly, a curiosity, a story without confirmation. But anomalies are not errors. They are indicators. Flight 912 demonstrated that time can preserve without progressing, that events can be held intact and released only when the present becomes compatible. This reframes disappearance. To vanish is not always to be lost. Sometimes it is to be contained. And containment implies intention, not human intention, structural intention. Time does not behave like a river that carries everything away. It behaves like an architecture that stores what it cannot place. Most moments pass through this structure and dissolve into memory. Some refuse to settle. They remain active, accessible, unfinished. Flight 914 is not behind us. It is not ahead of us. It is adjacent, a preserved moment still waiting to complete itself as past. And if one interval could be released, others can be too. This recording does not close the event. It documents its continued accessibility. The access window is unstable, and now that you are here, the interval is aware. End of transmission.